This is part 4 of the interview with Dr. Richard Stammler on past life regression. Dr. Stammler is the director of the Warrenton Inner Healing Center, where he conducts clinical hypnotherapy and past life regression. Dr. Stammler is also the editor of the International Journal of Regression Therapy. He has a PhD in transpersonal psychology. In this interview, we're coming to a very interesting area of Dr. Stammler's work, which is about ETs. Yes, ETs and extraterrestrial beings. If you were a curious child like myself, I'm sure you have asked again and again, what is beyond the reality we live in? Were there other intelligent life forms beyond Earth? And you would probably agree that the likelihood of their existence is so much more probable than not. Dr. Stammler has done some research in non-Earth life that show up in regression, and written a book called Transmundial Beings in Regression Therapy. What struck me most is the contact between us and these other beings is ever so close. And when I started to read the channeled materials coming from them, I'm deeply in awe about the depth of wisdom I discovered and a brand new way of looking at things. In this interview, we are going to explore the various aspects of this contact and the transformation that comes along. So, can we challenge ourselves to open up a space within us that is larger than we ever know? Can we put our habitual judgment or fear aside to see what is out there in this vast universe? If you listen carefully, you may even discover an exciting aspect of yourself that you may or may not know. Okay, let's get started. Dr. Stammler, can you tell us how your research in non-Earth life that show up in regression came about?
Yeah. In my training to be a past life regressionist, I noticed there were two things that were absent. Now, there's several schools to get that training from, and not all schools miss this topic. But in my training, it kind of was missed. And by the time I became practicing, it was obvious to me that there were two parts that were missing. And the two parts were energies that could attach to your energy through various forms, various types. And the other part was the whole issue of ETs showing up in regression. Now, when you think of past life experiences, you don't tend to think of ET experiences, but even past life experiences can involve that, like an actual abduction scenario, or in fact, some people have had lives as non-humans on other planets. So I became really curious about that, and I was given permission by IART, the organization I belong to canvass the members. So I developed a questionnaire, and I canvassed the members on how often this comes up, what do they do with it, does it help when it comes up to clear up whatever patient or the client came in with, whatever issues they had. And so it was a fairly detailed questionnaire. I mean, there's some things, because these people are busy people and I wanted to be sure and get a response from them, I tried to keep it to 15 to 20 minutes for them to fill it out. But there's some areas where after the fact I'd go, well, I wish I'd covered that, or maybe in a future one I would. But nonetheless, I got a fairly good response back, about 20% of the membership, which for polling purposes is a pretty good response rate. And so that led into, that actually was part of my dissertation, and then it subsequently led to writing the book on it. And what I found was the term ET has so much baggage associated with it, and didn't include some of the experiences that would come up in therapy. For example, some of the things that come up in therapy are occasionally ETs from another dimension that get locked into this dimension, and they're trapped, and somehow they connect to the client, and you try to help resolve that, and normally you can as a therapist. So there are some instances of this occurring that just don't fit the ET moniker. And so the term that I came up with to try to include all of this was transmundial beings, that is, beings that are not of Earth or beyond Earth. which is what that term means. So to shorten that, it's TMB, and I'll use that term in our discussion. And I mean, I had an interest in this topic anyway. One of the areas of interest that I had, and the past life stuff just accelerated that interest. But one of the interests was through remote viewing. So it turns out if you do much research in the remote viewing phenomenon, that the remote viewers find that they're quite easily can remote view beings and places that are totally off Earth and answer questions about it. So one of the areas to look at, if you're interested in that, is to go to the Farsight Institute run by Courtney Brown. And he's written 2 really interesting books on that topic because he was interested in it. So that's really where my interest came from. Now, in terms of the discussion today, what I have come to realize recently is that the entire ET phenomenon is something that has been with human beings really since the inception of the species. And in fact, it's clear to me from the research that ETs have been meddling in our DNA for various reasons. Now, if you listen to Bashar, and I know I've mentioned him before in our discussions, Bashar says there's 7 different ET interventions in our DNA makeup, in our human DNA, that has shaped us in various directions and actually has an impact on things like our religious orientation and many other aspects. So it's quite fascinating. But what I've really come to realize is that as we move closer to disclosure, so officially and scientifically, those institutions that comprise that, government and academic institutions, for various reasons, will not touch this topic and will consider it fantasy. And those people in the past who have come out to speak about this have been systematically labeled as either mentally ill, bizarre, fantasizing. There's been, I believe, an organized effort to relegate this whole topic to either to fantasy or mental illness.
What is the main reason for doing so?
So what happens is that there's this group that is invested in keeping a status quo, suppressing the knowledge of ETs, and suppressing the knowledge of these, the technology that has been gleaned from these people. And Greer will tell you, he says that if we made this technology, for example, there's technology of energy devices that take energy from the 0-point energy of the universe, of space all around us. And according to Greer, he says in a generation, poverty worldwide could be totally eliminated. I mean, just think about virtually free energy for any application. And if you think about that, then you would also stumble upon who has a vested interest in that energy not getting out. So the whole fossil fuel conglomerate, and maybe the 1% of people that have, and I'm just throwing a number out there, I don't know exactly what it is, but 60% or 80% of the wealth of the world, they would have an interest in the status quo. So that's been the case. And when Bashar talks about that, he says we humans are coming out of such a place of darkness that other communities in the galaxy, so other non-human beings, are watching us and with great interest to see whether we can come out of this. And there's every indication now, and it started with 2012, that that this whole thing's going to break open. Um, so the big insight that I got was this is essential for us as a species to break out of this incredible limitations that we've agreed to before birth, and come into our full power. And the ET aspect is going to accomplish that. The ET aspect, which is at a, if you will, a much higher vibratory level than we are, and therefore also at a much higher level spiritually. So not all of them are, but the ones that are about to interact with us are, and they will help us, if we are ready, pull us into a much higher spiritual dimension. And the aspect of that is that our connection and attachment to the physical material world will be much less. And what that brings with it is less or virtually no dependence on time. Okay, we feel like we're locked in time. That gets to be a permeable membrane, and much less attachment to physical space, which also becomes a permeable membrane. And the actual rules of physics, it's not right to say that they'll change. What will happen is the same kind of appreciation, but at a much greater level, that we got when Einstein's relativity came out. You know, we felt that material reality is fixed, time marches on in fixed intervals, and of course the theory of relativity tells you that neither one of those is the case, that time and space change based on the force of gravity, the mass. And so the next leap will be an understanding that time and space actually are not fixed at all, even to the degree that relativity says they were. And with it comes an expansion of consciousness, both as a species and as individuals. If we remember one of the past interviews we've had, and we've talked about that you select the conditions in which you're born, the life, the sex, the parents, the issues you're going to deal with, then a legitimate question is why did we choose to be born in this time period? And the answer for virtually everyone is that we wanted to go through this expansion of consciousness. Because as man goes through it, that is the species, we as individuals are a part of that. As a matter of fact, it's individuals that does that. And we have an opportunity to take that energy on and expand with it and expand our own consciousness with it. And so that's very powerful. Not everyone will do that. And remember, when we talk about quantum mechanics, all versions of reality are available to you. So for those, and I think you can look at some popular figures, particularly politically, that are stuck in an old paradigm, those folks will not move into the reality. They're not likely to, let's say it that way. They're not likely to move into the reality where this vast expansion of consciousness occurs, and you get elevated to a higher vibratory level, and with that will be contacts with ETs. Yeah, so this is actually the whole show. And if you note Bashar says the reason we have such a great population on the earth today, one of the reasons, is that so many souls wanted to participate in this experience that, quote, he said, they'll take any life just to be here on earth at this time and experience this. So if we talk about this dark aspect of mass consciousness that is in our reality, that partly by design and partly for historical reasons, our past, ancient past, and even recent past, perhaps our religious institutions, the whole structure of the beliefs associated with all that is highly skewed, so that we have a very false picture of who we are, what we are, and where we're going. And those things that we would consider untruths as a part of this expansion, those have to be exposed, and they will be. And another aspect of what Bashar says, and I certainly agree with him, is that our institutions have to be a mirror of our level of consciousness, which incorporated a lot of fear in the past. Our level of consciousness is incorporated or produces the political institutions, the religious institutions, and other institutions. And as you expand beyond that, in terms of expanding your consciousness and your spiritual level, your vibratory level, all those things are kind of the same thing, different ways of saying it, then those constructs will have to shift. And a part of this shift will be, has to be, a reformulation, if not an outright collapse, of many of our religious institutions, of our governmental institutions, and at some point, even the way we conduct economic commerce. For example, the dollar. And so as we move, institutions will either move as well and transform, or they'll outright collapse and be replaced by another institution that serves the higher function rather than often today as it does the lower function.
So what is the time frame you see this would happen?
Well, so that's interesting. So that we can talk about 2012. There are psychics, many of the ones that I, bump into during the day, and you can, if you check the web and also the channelers, they'll tell you that 2012, all right, some folks expected dramatic changes visually and out there in material reality, and were disappointed when that didn't happen. But you see at the inner level, at the spiritual level, there really were vast changes. And one of the things that anybody that had any psychic abilities, and I don't claim to be a part of that group, I'd like to be, but I don't claim to be, is they would say they just felt tremendous energy coming. And in fact, according to Bashar, we have entered a threshold where things are biased before that threshold to the negative, and there, he says, a slight bias to the positive. And also, Bashar says his ET group is a part of a consortium in the galaxy that has had a, quote, a hands-off policy on man. And although there's been individual contact, that contact has not been of the kind that would be visible or would be broadcastable or would be shareable. And that all changes. With 2012, when we feel we're ready for the contact, then it will happen, and happen in increasing frequency. And he forecast a date of 2015, which is where we're at now, that sometime this year there will be an official acknowledgement of ET presence. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I see from TV programs, television programs that talk about UFO experiences. For example, in Bentwaters, England was a very famous one. And in the program that I saw just a few months ago, the colonel that was the base commander spoke about the incident on camera. Now, up to that point, people would be forced to sign a secrecy document that they could not talk about that event, or they'd even be encouraged to poo-poo it officially, that it didn't happen, that it was some made-up thing. But that's changed, and so at a base commander would be someone who would be quite knowledgeable about the security apparatus, and when something's classified top secret, and the fact that he can't talk about it. And for him to be able to talk could only have happened if somebody gave him permission to do that, even retired after the fact. And so something has shifted. The other thing is technology is just booming. It is in fact accelerating, as time is accelerating in that respect. And so battery technology, solar technology, and probably not too far down the road, this zero-point energy technology will come out, because it'll have so many places in the world where it can come out, that the group that has this huge investment in fossil fuels they can't stop it. And we're kind of at the cusp of that. Part of it is the hybrid technology in cars and electric technology. All we need is, and it's already on the drawing boards, the scientific research has already occurred to start working battery technology at the quantum level, which will vastly improve not only what the battery can do and what it can hold, but also how it can harvest sunlight energy. Right now, I think last figure I saw, we only extract like 17% of the power out of sunlight that's available. A leaf, for example, which uses quantum processes in its photosynthesis, extracts in excess of 90%. It may have been 99%. I don't remember the exact number, but it's in excess of 90%. So that shows you what's possible. And when that's possible, I mean, you can envision a day where you have this reasonably sized solar device on your rooftop, and you don't ever have to plug into the grid for electricity. It just isn't necessary. Tesla has recently come out with a battery, and it's very reasonable, that will store that energy, and you can use that energy when sunlight isn't available. So things are changing very, very rapidly, and that's all a part of this. That's all a part. The technology we see is, in fact, an expansion of consciousness. And increasingly, particularly the younger generations, it just doesn't have a sense of limits.
It seems like us humans also have to overcome our shortcomings, like the conflict of egos, corruptions, selfishness. Otherwise, even if we have more technology, more resources, we would still use them in the wrong way, would still serve the wrong purpose, would still be imbalance.
Yeah, right. But you see, you're not going to get more if you don't solve that other problem. You see, the two go hand in hand. Are moving into the reality where we interchange, interact with ETs. We are not going to do that if we don't shift our energy. And the process, in fact, shifts the energy. You realize when Bashar says, if we came face to face with you, because people will say, we want to meet you, how can we do that? And he says, we've done that on occasion, and what happens is their level of vibration is so much, he says, he doesn't quite express it the way I will, but all of our limitations, all of our belief structures, all of the things that we've hidden from ourselves, of ourselves, will suddenly become aware of it. And he says some people can't handle it. And so the point being is there isn't these beings out there like somebody from China before, we had travel across the globe and we suddenly meet them. It's expanding your own consciousness to allow in that new consciousness. And expanding that consciousness is what gets you beyond thinking just of ego, you see? Because you have now expanded to more of yourself. And the role then that ego plays, it doesn't go away, but it's much, much less, which is the way it should be. So it isn't that the ET is going to hand us 0-point energy devices and we still have the dynamic that's going on Earth right now, the dark dynamic. No, we get beyond the dark dynamic, and the process of getting with the ETs is what helps us step out of that. When you make contact with a higher, for the most part, I don't think it's true in every case, but when you make contact with a higher dimensional being, really, even in your dreams, you are in fact expanding your consciousness. So the technology and the expansion of consciousness go hand in hand. That's why I think the whole TET question isn't a question about UFOs and these strange beings showing up. No, it's a question of ourself, our own consciousness expanding into a much greater role, which then puts us into a higher dimension. We start vibrating at a higher level. Mm-hmm. And the technology just goes with it. And the caring for the poor. Look, if you're going to connect with a species that looks so different from us, really they're our children, but nonetheless, through the hybrid program, aren't you going to shift your consciousness on the way you view the variations in the human species? I mean, you almost have to. Mm-hmm. There's more of a sense of self, whether the person has a black skin or green skin or yellow skin, it doesn't really matter. And so again, the contact with ETs is the ascension. That's how the ascension happens. In individual levels, it has happened historically all the way through time. That's what's happened with Seth, for example, and others that are channeled now that are coming from the light, from the 9th dimension and higher. But what's different now is that we as a mass consciousness have the opportunity to do that. That's what's different. Mm-hmm. Now, not every individual will. Some will choose not to.
So, aside from the physical side of things like new technology, on the spiritual side, what are the information that the ET are bringing to us?
Well, according to Bashar, and I like him, and I agree with most of what he says, the first contact we will have, which is not too far down the road, will give us the answer of our true history. And just knowing our true history would change everything. So, according to Bashar, the human that has not had their DNA messed with, the human species, or the proto-human, let's go back into the past, proto-human, is Sasquatch or SETI or Bigfoot, however you want to call him, abdominal snowman. So that being is real. Okay, even Seth talks about him. And that being is the humanoid, the proto-human, that has not had its DNA altered by ET influences. Those of us who are here now and call ourselves Homo sapiens have had our DNA altered 7 times, or by 7 different species of ETs. So part of what you would get through getting the spiritual message is discovering who we really are. Mm-hmm. And a part of that is to throw off the false limitations that, you can almost call it a conspiracy if you want to, but that has been encouraged in us. Let's put it that way. So rather than call it a conspiracy, we could say we've been encouraged not to understand our power individually. For example, I'm not saying this is it, all right, but I'm just going to give you an example that you can play with and see how everything changes. What if we discovered that our great religious figures had a deep connection with ETs? And those biblical references in the past that talk about God wasn't God at all, so kind of like the Gnostics believe, but was in fact an ET being that, in our lowly state as developed humans at that point, we translated into a magical being, i.e., God. So, if we were to this is an example, all right. I'm not saying that's the case, although I think something similar is. It would totally change. It would change everything. It would change the religious institutions. It would change the way we think about ourselves. It would break free from so many limitations that are promulgated in part by religious institutions, but also by other institutions. And so just ridding yourself of those kinds of limitations in belief and belief structure changes. Remember, it's beliefs and belief structure that determines the reality you attach to, whether it's a positive reality or a negative reality. If you're freed from those belief systems that attach you to lesser realities or dark realities or negative realities, however you want to put it, you're now free, in quotes, to attach yourself to realities that are incredible, that you thought could never exist, although they do, but we don't live in it, but we can. So that's the process. That's the spiritual process. And when you vibrate at a higher level, then material reality doesn't have the hold on you that our dense material reality does at this time. And suddenly things become possible that were either very difficult or impossible before.
So here's another question. For people who are currently happy with a religion, maybe they find comfort in it, they find support in it, they're happy about their life, is there a need for them to change?
Well, so the reality is it is limiting. However, it's always the individual's choice. Okay, the reason that quantum mechanics works the way it does is it's the individual's choice what reality they want to live in. Now, the problem is for those people, they don't understand that they're really choosing that reality. However, that is the way it works. So those people who attach to those beliefs and are not opening to questioning them, they will continue to live in that reality. As we know, there's an infinity of realities. And the realities correlate with your belief, or your belief correlates with that reality. And for those people, I mean, they don't even have to be happy. You're painting kind of a positive picture. All you have to be is to believe that you need to have that in your life as it's expressed through that religion, and you will attach your beliefs to it. I mean, that's exactly what the fundamentalists do. And they will live that reality.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, I would guess, maybe all of them, would not benefit from this expansion of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after they've died and they review their life and they see the possibilities, then they can choose in the next life to create different conditions and beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way it works.
Right.
Yeah. So they're not forced to, and unless there's a part of you that wants to do that, you simply won't participate in it.
Mm-hmm.
And in some versions, which is kind of interesting, I don't know if you've heard of Bruce Lipton.
Yes.
So Bruce Lipton's a very interesting character. But if, and I've got quotes from his latest flyer that I'm going to use in the workshop I'm putting up here pretty soon. He believes, and there's a version of Earth that does that, that as a part of this process, there'd be a huge depopulation of Earth. I mean, people will die. They're going to leave. And of course, we know from early discussions we've had that your death is selected by you. Okay, selected is in quotes because the ego doesn't do the selecting. It's the inner self that does. And often it's done before your birth, when you wish to exit, how much you want to participate in. And so in those versions of Earth where there's a great depopulation, that group did not want to participate any further than they did. And they leave. They exit the reality, and they do it through death. There's versions that don't do that, so it's not necessary.
And then the question is, when you talk about these ETs with higher vibration, it sounded like they are more advanced than human, but from the soul perspective, all beings in the universe are equal, right?
Well, the beings are equal in value, but they're not equal in terms of spiritual development.
Uh-huh. I mean, there are things that we can learn from them, but not like we have to see them higher, because in the past, in the religion, we have been accustomed to worship the god or worship some beings higher than us. But this time in this transition, is it more like connecting with them, but not to see ourselves lower?
Well, that's right, and it's a mistake to do that. And there's channel material out there, the Hathors, for example, that I think does a very good job of telling us, or warning us even, that we're about to meet beings that have greater powers than we have, okay? And it's not that they have greater powers, it's that they have less limitations. Those powers exist in us in a nascent form, but we've not permitted ourselves to be able to exercise our full power. But you see, that's part of what the expansion of consciousness allows you to do. And as we meet these beings who are further down the road in that respect, the last thing we want to do is worship them. And you see, I think that's happened in the past. I think some of the biblical references are in fact veiled words of the worship of these beings. And I think when we learn our true past, most of us, perhaps all of us, won't fall into that trap again. And you see, that's the beauty of discovering, quote, the truth. And according to Bashar, our first real ET contact, open contact, will explain that. We'll open that up. And so that's why that's important. It's really the whole ball game.
Yeah, I find it interesting that we need to be humble, but at the same time, not to see ourselves lower.
Absolutely. Yep, you're right. Yep. Yeah, the thing to do is not to see them as something more than we are, but it's to see them as what we are that is yet undiscovered.
Do you see it as an equal exchange? Like there are things that they would like to learn from us, and they have things that we can learn from them, so it is a bi-directional exchange.
Yeah, it is, but, so there's a big but. One of the things I understand from Bashar when he talks, so Bashar, when he's asked questions, speaks very authoritatively of our culture, our history, and why is he able to do this? See, here's the thing to understand. You know, when I said there's other ET cultures out there watching us, what does that mean? Does that mean they have a big telescope and they see us moving around? No, that's not what it means. Yes, they have technology. Now, here's something that Greer says that has a bearing on this topic. And right now, we have consciousness assisted by technology. So what does that mean? Well, your cell phone can talk to virtually anyone, anywhere in the world, and that's technology that assists consciousness. And, 100 years ago, we didn't have that. It is magical. Now, in the future, what's going to happen is we're going to have consciousness-assisted technology. So it's technology that, and we're already seeing some of it, it's technology that's created and assisted by consciousness. Mm-hmm. So your thinking and your thoughts will directly impact. So rather than this telephone, we might still have a device, but it's the thought that activates the device and gets the information. Mm-hmm. It's the thought that flies their UFOs, their vehicles. And that is consciousness-assisted technology. So those species out there that are watching us are doing that through consciousness. Every thought you have, every experience you have, is in fact recorded in space-time. And it is in fact recorded outside of space-time as well. And that is available to anyone who has not placed the limits on themselves, so we call them psychics. In those cultures, they're all nth degree psychics. Often when you see ETs described, they speak with you just through your mind. Mm-hmm. There's no sound, there's no voice, it's not necessary. And if you listen to channeled information, for example, like Bashar, he'll say, just a moment. Seth does the same thing. All of the, real channeled information, you'll find that that's the case. And what's really happening is he is accessing his entire culture or specific parts of his culture, of his population, to get the answer to the question, or to find out whether they agree as a group that he should provide that answer to us. So there's a kind of a rule that they don't want to meddle in our evolutionary development beyond a certain point. And you'll almost sense that he's going back with his mind to whatever group he's associated with it to say, is it all right if I tell them this, or how much of this can I tell them? Well, that same capability, they can tune into our thoughts and our reality at a level that we've limited ourselves from doing. And so, and Bashar, if you listen to him, will thank us for the contact that we have with them. Well, when he gets a voluntary contact with someone from our species, he's able to download everything about our culture, the past history. It's all available to him. It's all available to him. And so you see, that's the level of communication that consciousness is capable of once we remove the limitations that we placed ourselves in this material reality. And most ET species have that capability. I mean, it's not magic, because in remote viewing, that's exactly what you're doing. Except even remote viewing, as practiced by the best, still has some limitations in it. I mean, just if you want to see the process happening real time, it's absolutely fascinating. Watch one of the Farsight, they actually tape sessions of how these guys are getting the material. And for ET species, that's just, they get all the material that way, and they can tune to anywhere. Of course, our remote viewers can as well. So that is the mode of getting information. So that kind of information they already have access to. It's already available to them.
Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, the contact is really for us, not for them, because they have already made the contacts, just we haven't contacted them.
So I'll have to modify that again. And let me give you a neat example. Let's see. where did I get this information? Oh, it was the Bentwater situation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Bentwater is where we stored our nuclear weapons, mostly for the cruise missiles. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big deal. And they actually, according to the British reports, and also in part this Colonel Base Commander that was there, the ETs found the one bunker that had the live nuclear weapons in it, the actual weapons, and actually with a laser created a hole in the top of it to look inside it. A day or two later, they had a device come crashing down through the trees in the forest on base, or maybe it was just off base. I don't know which. I don't remember which. And it was a black pyramidal kind of device. And now Greer reports this, okay? So I've never read this aspect of it, but Greer says that when the base people showed up, there was actually a being that stepped out of that black pyramid and said, "We are you," and I may get the time frame wrong, 200,000 years in the future. And if you don't stop what you're doing with nuclear weapons, you will destroy yourselves and we will not be.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is an interest in what we do. And what you have to understand is we see ourselves as isolated on Earth, but we're not. Our energy, the things that we do, the advancements we make, the spiritual level that we're at, whenever that changes incrementally, that ripples through the entire universe. And we haven't talked about it, but it ripples in particularly to the hybrids. So if you learn or read much about abduction scenarios, and Bashar acknowledges that this happens. As a matter of fact, he says there are 7 hybrid races, and the one that is the most recent is the one that's going to contact us first because they're most like us, and in fact, they're our children. So the hybrid races were a hybridization of humans and grays, and this has been going on for a long time. And our spiritual advancement intimately affects them and their civilization's advancement. So they have a great stake in us moving forward. And really that's what Bashar is about. Mm-hmm. Because he's a part of one of those hybrid races as well. My awareness is that this isn't just a curiosity. I mean, it's a great curiosity, but it isn't just a curiosity. It's intimately connected with the next fantastic expansion of the consciousness of humanity, mm-hmm. and our individual consciousnesses. Because if the individuals don't expand their consciousness, humanity doesn't either. It's always done by individuals.
So do they have to show up physically for the contact to happen? Right now, we already have channelers who are able to bring them in through channeling. Is that a kind of contact as well?
Yes, it is, absolutely. It's at the mental level,
Uh-huh.
at the mind level.
Uh-huh.
Your pineal gland in your brain
Mm-hmm.
generates DMT, dimethyltryptophan. I think that's the right way to say it. And primarily it does so in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. And that is, quote, designed to allow you to easily move into other dimensions. And so much of this contact is in a dream state. That's the easiest contact to make. And what Bashar says is, he says many of you, speaking of us in this density, show up in his reality. We just don't remember it. It's done in the dream state. We travel when DMT is active in our pineal gland. So when you're in physical reality, you're not locked into that. That's a reality that you sort of play in, quote, during the daytime, unquote. And that's when your ego is an aspect of it, which of course is there, a structure of consciousness to navigate physical reality. But when you sleep, and you need to do that, or you literally go insane, you need to dream, not sleep so much, but dream. You move out of the physical reality and you connect with your higher self, you connect with other selves, you connect with counterparts, and you connect with higher dimensions. So, as a matter of fact, that it happens all the time, that particularly in the dream state, those parts of us that are in higher dimensions connect with us and make suggestions, create ideas, which then are made real. Many movies happen that way. So it's more fluid than what you're thinking of it to be.
Mm-hmm. So even part of ourself is non-physical, and the non-physical part of ourself can make contact with the non-physical part of them.
Yeah, okay. That's one way to say it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. Your non-local mind is the non-physical self
Mm-hmm.
that you carry with you. Yeah, just that. See, that's the part once you transition out of physical reality, why Bashar says you become more of yourself. Well, you're aware of those other parts of you that you don't permit into awareness when you're focused on physical reality.
Mm-hmm.
But those parts are always there.
Right. I just feel that for human beings, we have this thing, we have to see it to believe it. So even though there are other means of contact right now, but because we're not seeing it physically, it's hard to convince our ego.
Of course, the problem with that, once you understand it, at the quantum mechanical level, it's like Seth says. Seth says, when I connect with you, I don't see your walls, I just see energy. But he says, really, you don't see your walls either. You see, there's this illusion that physical reality is, quote, real.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't.
Yeah, but we're just being so used to defining what is real as what we see.
Yeah, but you're forgetting that you are part of the scientific culture, and that's the world of materialism, and not all people that are alive on Earth buy into that, and we certainly haven't bought into that in times of past, such as when we were Aborigines. They don't buy into that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they say we dream our reality.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking from a modernist position, but we haven't always held that, and there's some groups, cultural groups, that don't hold on to that now either.
Right. Okay, the other impression I get is when we say the contact is going to come, it felt like you're waiting for an event to happen. But is it actually the other way around? When you work on yourself, you expand yourself, you actually make that event possible?
Yes, that's true. And not only that, if you follow your dreams and write down your dreams,
Mm-hmm.
And if you're open to it, you can, quote, remember that in your dreams you're already making contact.
Mm-hmm.
So that inner self is already intimately connected with all of that stuff out there. And the inner self is helping to create the dynamics of you moving into that consciousness. Because the inner self, as Jung said, is about helping you individuate, that is, expand to your greatest potential. And yes, absolutely right. So you're setting up the conditions, and that's always the case, for what happens in your reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's really what Bashar says. He says, now, as of 2012, it's totally dependent on us how quickly this happens and when this happens.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So that's why I'm so excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because And what you find in therapy, and we may have discussed this before, is that there are people whose, quote, past lives, and again, we've talked about what that means, past and future, but, quote, past lives, to use that term, is intimately associated with a planet that's not Earth and with a species that's not human. And they have incarnated as a human for two reasons. One is being human is very difficult, particularly for an ET. And so there's a lot to be learned from it. And two, they're here to participate in this experiment of humanness in order to help bring some of their spiritual knowledge into the gene pool. And that's happening on actually a massive scale. And there are some, and I do believe this is true, ETs that live with us that in fact have shape-shifted into a human form. That's not as difficult as you would think, or you might think. And they're here for the same purpose.
So they bring a perspective that we don't have that we can learn from?
Yes, they bring us expansion of consciousness, and we come in contact with it, even though we don't know where it's coming from or what it is. A psychic probably would know, or a remote viewer would probably know, but it affects us, and it encourages us to also expand into that space.
So in practical terms, it might be the way they look at things, the way they respond to the situation, or how they handle things.
Yeah, but it may just be an energy too. Yeah, because what you're describing is behavioral in 3D space. But what they're really giving you, which is more important, I think, is their thought process, their energy environment, and when you come in contact with that, it impacts you.
Okay, you sense the difference, and then you realize how limited or how different you are.
Yeah. Now, some people would just simply want to open themselves up to that, and that's your choice, you know. But if you're ready for it, you will open yourself up to it automatically, and it will accelerate you. Yeah. And there are lots of people now that want that.
There's also a saying that more and more kids being born into this world now are having a higher frequency. Is that right?
Well, it's actually more dramatic than that. So the term crystal children and indigo children has been around for quite a while. And channeled material says that, in fact, those children are at a higher vibratory level. Now, they don't always have an easier time. Sometimes in school, these are the ones that are labeled as autistic or Asperger's syndrome because they are a little different. And there is, in fact, some indication that there's a third DNA strand that's activated in those kids. So they start having psychic capabilities, that isn't out there in the general population.
So what are the things we can do to help them adjust better?
Okay, so one is don't be so ready to give them a label that's negative. Two is understand that they're going to be different and allow them to be different and don't make them feel abnormal over it. Three is many of them are wanderers, starseeds. Many of them are they're reincarnated in a human form, but they've come from a non-human planet, and sometimes they need therapy, and they need the kind of therapy that lets them discover that past life and understand who they are, because sometimes they have serious trouble adjusting to how negative and ugly our world can be that they didn't find in their home planet.
So this is part of your work as well, helping them through regression.
Yes. Yep. And I actually get more and more people, and that's not because I advertise it, but I do get more and more people lately that have an ET connection.
So once they understand that part of themselves, something would change and certain stress would be removed?
So what happens is very often these people rightfully will say, I don't think I'm human, and I don't like being here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I belong here. And so they're sensing they're abhorred by some of our negative humanness, particularly in mass consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just terribly dissatisfied with it, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't know why that is, why it's there. You
Mm-hmm.
can have depression, you can have suicides in these people,
Mm-hmm.
and when you get them to understand, and you can actually in regression allow them to go back to their home planet, and they go, oh, okay, now I get it. And in fact, you can send them to the place of review as a soul in between lives and let them understand the process of deciding to come here. And when they realize that's a decision they made for their own good and for the good of others, then that changes the ballgame. Then they
Mm-hmm.
go, oh no, I came to change. I came to change this negative energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to stop fighting it. I'm going to work to change it.
Mm-hmm. So this negative energy, the negative side of ego, the negative emotions, or the pain body as Eckhart Tolle puts it, where do they come from?
Yeah, but so the Hathors, and I would go to Tom Kenyon's website, um, Kenyon, I think is the way he spells his name, and it's really pretty good channel material. Um, and what they expressed that I thought was very insightful is the creation of our reality. So Seth was once asked, who created Earth and this material reality? And his answer to that was, every entity, so the entity is what spins off our lives, is our entity is in fact our higher self. Every entity that has ever lived, is living, or will live in the future in this reality helped create it and sustains it. And and the Hathor material says, which I find really fascinating, says that this reality was designed to feel the greatest depth of emotion and feeling. And that range is both positive and negative. And I think if we didn't have the duality in this reality, as a matter of fact, I'm sure of it, if we did not have the extreme negativity and this extreme positivity, we would not have the extremes of emotions that we have. I think that's a necessary condition.
Mm-hmm. It's for the
Now,
wide ranges of experience?
the ranges of
Of
emotional,
emotions, okay.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
because
Emotional experience.
it is the emotional experience that brings about the lesson,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's love or whether it's hate or greed or any of those things in between. It's the intensity of the emotional experience that drives home knowledge and lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And so this reality was designed for that.
Mm-hmm. When emotions are amplified, you can see it better.
After the fact, not always during the fact.
Uh-huh.
So if you have rage, you're totally caught up in that range, but afterwards you go, man, that released an incredible amount of energy.
Uh-huh.
So often it's after the fact that you really appreciate what that emotion represented in terms of energy, because it's all about movement of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think as we move beyond this, my sense is that the negative part of the range will be truncated.
Mm-hmm. This is a very interesting discussion. Dr. Stammler, do you have anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Well, let's see. So, for those listening to this, and if you're listening, then I think by definition, you're ready to fully participate in this transformation. And the way thoughts go, every thought is recorded. It's never lost. Every event is recorded. It's never lost. And when you're on the other side of this material experience, you will have access to all of it in a more dramatic fashion than you do while you're living it, because you'll also have access to the way other people responded to that situation or event, and what they were thinking. And so you get a tremendous amount of learning out of it. However, those of you listening to this interview are ready for the transformation, will participate in it, and because you're participating in it, you will help create it. So when that's what the tipping point is all about. But in the spiritual side, it's even more dramatic, because one thinks a thought. Okay, remember Seth says one thought has more power in it, physical power in it, than it took man to go to the moon and back. All right, so if you get that sense, now what happens is if you get a second person that shares in the same thought or belief systems, that's now that power plus an exponent. So it's exponential. And each one that joins adds an exponential dimension to that power, and it starts shifting the reality. Or more correctly, it produces in us now a selection of the quantum reality that now fits that and accelerates us into that. So I encourage you to see that reality in your mind and see yourself moving into it, because it's going to be fantastic. And I'll be there with you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Stammler, for sharing this important information with us. So this concluded our interview on regression and the upcoming transformation. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy it. If you have further questions, please feel free to email quantumregression@gmail.com.